I've never believed in ghost stories. If something weird happened, I always assumed there had to be a normal explanation. Looking back, I still think there probably was. I just can't explain it. A few years ago, I spent a lot of weekends hiking. Not because I was experienced, but because it was cheap and got me away from screens for a while. I usually stuck to marked trails that had decent foot traffic, nothing extreme. One Saturday, I decided to try a trail I'd never visited before. It wasn't famous, but it had good reviews online. Most people said it was peaceful and easy to finish in about 4 hours. The parking lot only had 6 or 7 cars when I arrived around 8 in the morning. I packed water, snacks, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. I wasn't planning on staying late. The first half of the hike was completely normal. I passed families, a couple walking their dog, and 2 older guys carrying expensive cameras. Everyone smiled or nodded. Around an hour in, I reached a fork in the trail. The wooden sign pointed left toward the main loop. Another narrow path continued straight. Someone had tied faded orange tape around a tree near its entrance. I figured it was closed. As I was checking the map on my phone, an older man appeared behind me. He wasn't dressed strangely, just hiking boots, a backpack, and a baseball cap. He asked if I'd been there before. I told him it was my first visit. He pointed toward the taped-off path. "Don't take shortcuts," he said. I laughed and replied that I wasn't planning to. He looked at me for another second. "I'm serious." Then he walked away without another word. It felt odd, but I assumed he'd seen inexperienced hikers get lost before. I continued along the main trail. About 20 minutes later, I realized I'd dropped one of my water bottles. I remembered setting it down while checking my phone near the fork. Rather than continue, I turned around. When I got back, the bottle wasn't there. Neither was the older man. The taped-off trail was still in front of me. As I looked around for the bottle, I noticed fresh footprints leading onto the closed path. Probably maintenance workers, I thought. Then I saw my bottle. It was lying maybe 30 feet down that narrow trail. I figured someone had kicked it by accident. Without thinking much about it, I stepped over the tape and walked toward it. That was my mistake. The path wasn't difficult. In fact, it looked surprisingly well used. There were footprints, broken branches, even bicycle tire tracks. I grabbed the bottle. Then I heard voices farther ahead, people laughing. Since it sounded like other hikers, I kept walking. Maybe this wasn't actually closed. After another 5 minutes, the voices stopped. Not faded away, stopped, like someone had pressed mute. The woods became unbelievably quiet. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed gone. I remember noticing how loud my own breathing had become. That's when I realized something else. The path behind me didn't look familiar anymore. I turned around, expecting to see the orange tape. Instead, there were 3 different trails branching away from where I'd come. I was certain there had only been one. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual. What bothered me was the compass. It kept spinning. North changed every few seconds. I restarted it. Same thing. For the first time that day, I felt genuinely uneasy. I picked the widest trail, assuming it had to reconnect eventually. Instead, it became narrower. Then narrower, until branches scraped both sides of my backpack. I walked for another 15 minutes before realizing I hadn't seen a single trail marker. No paint, no signs, nothing. Then I noticed something hanging from a tree, a length of bright orange tape, the exact same kind I'd crossed earlier. I smiled with relief. Finally. As I got closer, I froze. The tape wasn't tied around the tree. It was wrapped around a hiking pole. The pole had been pushed deep into the ground. Next to it sat an unopened bottle of water, the same brand as mine. I looked around. Nobody, just silence. I suddenly remembered the older man's warning. Don't take shortcuts. I kept walking. Maybe another hiker had left supplies. Still, something about it bothered me. 5 minutes later, I found another hiking pole, then another. Each one had orange tape tied to it. Each one had something sitting nearby. A backpack, a jacket, a single boot, not scattered randomly, neatly placed, almost organized, like someone wanted them to be found. I stopped walking. Every instinct told me to turn around. The problem was, I had no idea which direction was back anymore. Every trail looked identical. I shouted, "Hello?" Nothing. I shouted again. This time someone answered. "Over here!" A man's voice, not far away. Relief flooded through me. I hurried toward the sound. "Keep talking," I yelled. Silence. Then, "You're close!" It came from somewhere else, not where I'd been heading. I changed direction. Again the voice moved. Always just ahead, never visible. I don't know how long I chased it. Maybe 10 minutes? Maybe 30? Eventually I realized something. The voice never sounded out of breath. Never stumbled over words, never got louder. The distance never changed. It stayed exactly the same, like someone was playing a recording. I stopped calling back. Immediately. The voice stopped too. The silence returned. I don't scare easily, but I honestly considered running. Instead, I forced myself to think logically. I took out my phone and opened the map I downloaded before the hike. Even without signal, GPS should have shown roughly where I was. Instead, the blue dot blinked, disappeared, reappeared somewhere else, then vanished completely. At that point, I accepted I was lost, really lost. I started marking trees with my pocket knife every 50 feet. Simple vertical cuts. That way I'd know if I was walking in circles. 20 minutes later, I found one of my marks. Except there were 2 extra cuts beside mine. Fresh. I hadn't made them. I know that sounds impossible. I wish I could explain it. I stared at those marks for almost a full minute. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy ones. Crunching leaves. Definitely another person. "Hey!" I shouted. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Nothing. I walked toward where I'd heard them. The footsteps started again, always keeping the same distance, never closer, never farther. I never saw anyone. By then, the sun was getting lower. The woods were darker than they should have been. Panic finally started creeping in. I wasn't worried about ghosts. I was worried about spending the night out there. I rationed my water and kept moving. Eventually, I saw something through the trees. A wooden sign. I almost laughed. Finally. When I reached it, my stomach dropped. It was the same fork from earlier. The orange tape, the main trail, everything. Except, my car keys were lying on the ground beside the sign. I checked every pocket. Sure enough, they were gone. I have absolutely no memory of dropping them. If I'd lost them there earlier, I would have noticed before walking onto the closed trail. I picked them up, walked back toward the parking lot. It was less than 5 minutes away. When I reached it, only one vehicle remained, mine. As I unlocked the door, I noticed someone standing near the edge of the trees, the older man, same backpack, same cap. He wasn't smiling. He just nodded once, then turned and walked back into the woods. I almost called after him. Instead, I got into my car and left. The drive home took about 2 hours. I didn't tell anyone. Honestly, I was embarrassed. It sounded ridiculous. A month later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online for discussions about that trail. Buried in an old hiking forum, I found a thread from years earlier. Several people mentioned accidentally wandering onto an unofficial path marked with orange tape. Most said they became disoriented for hours. One person claimed they'd heard someone calling for help that they could never find. Another wrote that they kept ending up back at the same intersection, no matter which direction they walked. A few commenters dismissed it as people getting confused in dense woods. They're probably right. Still, one reply caught my attention. It simply said, "If you ever see supplies left neatly beside orange tape, don't touch anything. It means someone already tried marking the way out and it didn't work." I never went back to find out if that was true. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe exhaustion, maybe poor navigation. Maybe I panicked and filled in the gaps with bad memories. But even now, years later, whenever I hike anywhere, I ignore every unofficial shortcut. And if someone who's clearly been there longer than I have tells me not to take a certain trail, I listen. I almost didn't send this story because nothing paranormal happened. There were no ghosts, strange creatures, or impossible events. Looking back, I think I simply walked into a trap that had probably been used many times before. What still bothers me is how normal everything seemed until the very last minute. If one small thing hadn't caught my attention, I don't think I would have made it back home. I was looking for a used camera online because I wanted something better than my phone, but couldn't afford a new one. After a few days of searching, I found an advertisement with a price that seemed unusually low. The pictures looked genuine, and the description was detailed enough that it didn't immediately raise any red flags. The seller answered my messages politely and didn't sound pushy. Everything about the conversation felt completely normal. When I asked if we could meet somewhere public, the seller apologized and explained that they were working long shifts inside a warehouse. They claimed they couldn't leave the property because deliveries arrived throughout the day. Instead, they suggested I stop by after work and meet them near the loading area. They even said other buyers had done the same thing before without any issues. I hesitated because I usually met sellers in parking lots or coffee shops. The seller seemed to understand my concern and offered to lower the price even more for the inconvenience. That made the deal feel even harder to pass up. I convinced myself that plenty of people picked up items from workplaces every day. It didn't seem dangerous at all. The directions led me to an older industrial area with several large buildings sitting close together. Most of them looked active, but the one I was supposed to visit seemed strangely quiet. There were trucks parked outside, though none of them appeared to be moving. The only sound came from a forklift somewhere behind the buildings that I couldn't actually see. I messaged the seller to say I had arrived. Almost immediately, I received a reply telling me to walk through an open side gate because visitors weren't allowed to use the front entrance. That little detail made everything feel more believable. As soon as I stepped through the gate, I noticed how empty the property was. There weren't any workers loading trucks or carrying equipment. I expected someone to wave me over, but nobody acknowledged me. A few security cameras were attached to the walls, though most looked old enough that I couldn't tell if they actually worked. Another message appeared on my phone, telling me to continue straight until I reached a large rolling door that was halfway open. The seller apologized again for making me walk so far and promised they would be waiting inside. I figured I had already come this far, so I kept going. Nothing felt obviously wrong yet. The rolling door opened into a massive storage area with shelves stacked almost to the ceiling. Most of the lights were off, leaving only a few bright sections surrounded by shadows. I called out that I was there, but nobody answered. My footsteps echoed loudly enough that I immediately wished I had stayed outside. A few seconds later, another message arrived. It simply read, "Walk to the back. Signal is bad in here." I looked down the long aisle between the shelves and didn't see a single person. The silence inside the building felt heavier than it should have. Even warehouses usually have machinery running somewhere. As I walked farther inside, I noticed several pallets wrapped in plastic sitting along the floor. They created blind corners every few feet, making it impossible to see very far ahead. I remember thinking it would be incredibly easy for someone to hide behind them. That thought made me stop for a moment before continuing. Halfway down the aisle, I heard a loud metallic bang somewhere behind me. It sounded like a heavy door closing. I turned around expecting to see a worker moving equipment, but the entrance was too far away to make out clearly, Everything looked exactly the same as when I walked in. I told myself I was just getting nervous for no reason. I reached the back of the aisle and found another message waiting. This time, it instructed me to turn left because the cellar was just around the corner. I followed the direction, expecting to finally meet someone. Instead, I entered another empty section filled with stacked boxes and shipping containers. My phone signal disappeared completely. I started feeling annoyed more than scared. I typed a message asking where exactly they were, but it refused to send. While waiting for the signal to return, I heard footsteps somewhere nearby. They weren't running or rushing. Whoever it was seemed to be walking at a slow, steady pace. I called out that I was there to buy the camera. The footsteps stopped immediately. I waited several seconds, expecting someone to answer, but the silence returned. I walked toward where I thought the sound had come from, only to find another empty aisle. There wasn't anyone there. As I turned to leave, I noticed something that instantly made me uncomfortable. A metal door I had walked past only moments earlier was now closed. I couldn't remember hearing it shut. I also couldn't remember seeing anyone close enough to reach it. It was probably nothing, but it suddenly felt like the building was changing around me. I decided I had wasted enough time and started heading back toward the entrance. After walking for several minutes, I realized I wasn't where I thought I should be. Every aisle looked nearly identical. The shelves, pallets, and containers repeated in every direction. Without realizing it, I had completely lost my sense of direction. I eventually reached another rolling door and pushed it open, expecting to step outside. Instead, it led into another section of the warehouse. That didn't make any sense. I was certain I had been walking in the opposite direction. For the first time, I felt genuine panic creeping in. Then I heard voices. They were quiet enough that I couldn't understand the words, but I knew there was more than one person. The voices stopped whenever I moved. Every time I stood still, they started again. It sounded less like people working and more like they were waiting for something. I pulled out my phone again, hoping to call someone, but there was still no signal. While looking at the screen, I noticed I had received one final message before losing service. It simply said, "Almost there." I hadn't heard my phone vibrate when it arrived. Reading those two words sent a chill through me. I stayed completely still and listened carefully. That's when I noticed something I had missed before. The footsteps I'd been hearing weren't random. They always stayed behind the shelves instead of entering the open aisles. Whoever was moving didn't want to be seen. They were keeping pace with me while staying hidden. I suddenly remembered an emergency exit sign I had passed earlier. Instead of trying to retrace my steps exactly, I looked upward. The green exit signs were mounted near the ceiling and pointed toward the nearest escape routes. It seemed obvious, but panic had stopped me from noticing them sooner. I ignored the messages, ignored the aisles, and simply followed the signs. Twice I found emergency doors secured with chains from the outside, which immediately told me something wasn't right. Emergency exits are never supposed to be blocked. That confirmed I needed to get out as quickly as possible. Finally, I found one door that opened without resistance. As I pushed it open, fresh air hit my face. I stepped into a narrow service road running behind the building. I didn't stop to look around. I ran until I reached my car, locked the doors, and drove away before catching my breath. Later that evening, I checked the online listing again. It had disappeared completely. So had the seller's account. My message history was gone because the account no longer existed. It was as if the entire conversation had never happened. I reported everything to the marketplace, but they couldn't recover much information. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I searched online to see if anyone else had experienced something similar. I found several stories from people describing fake marketplace listings that lured buyers to isolated locations. Most ended with robbery. A few said they left just before something felt wrong. Reading those accounts made me realize how close I may have come. To this day, I only agree to meet buyers or sellers in busy public places with plenty of people around. If anyone refuses and insists on meeting somewhere private, I don't care how good the deal is. Cameras can be replaced. Phones can be replaced. Money can be earned again. Walking into a trap because something seems like a bargain isn't worth the risk. Sometimes the most dangerous situations don't look dangerous until you're already standing in the middle of them.